Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to episode 326 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where we look at mysteries from the twin perspectives of faith and reason. In this episode, we're talking about a remote viewing experiment that Jimmy recently participated in. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today is Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
In the 1970s, investigators at Stanford Research Institute began looking into a psychic ability known as remote viewing. Remote viewers appeared to be able to retrieve information about distant or hidden targets that they had no normal way of knowing about. The CIA and the Defense Department became interested, which led to the creation of a program known as Stargate. The Stargate program closed in 1995, but remote viewing is still used today and is still being researched. Recently, Jimmy was contacted and asked to participate in a remote viewing study. What did the study involve? What did Jimmy do? And what were the results? That's what we'll be talking about on this episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Jimmy, why did you want to talk about today's mystery?
Well, we've covered remote viewing a number of times previously on the show, such as in episodes 102 and 103, where we introduced the subject. In episodes 156 and 157, we interviewed Stargate remote viewer Paul Smith. And in episodes 190 and 191, we interviewed Stargate remote viewer Bill Ray. You can go to mysterious.fm/ and the episode number to get each of those. Well, one of the things that I wanted to do at the time was a remote viewing experiment where we'd have a remote viewer look at a few targets and then report the results to you, the listener. That didn't end up working out, but I still kept the idea in the back of my mind. And I thought it would be, interesting for the audience to see an actual demonstration that they could make up their own minds about. Recently, a new way to do this occurred to me. I was asked by one of my contacts in the remote viewing community who reached out to me and asked if I'd be willing to participate in an experiment they were doing as an outbounder.
Okay, outbounder is a specialized term, so not many listeners will be familiar with it. What is an outbounder?
It's a specific person who participates in what's known as the Outbounder Protocol. This is a protocol for remote viewing that was developed back in the 1970s. What happens is you have a remote viewer in one location, and then you have another person, the outbounder, who goes out to a location that is not known to the remote viewer. The viewer then tries to pick up information about where the outbounder is located. There are variations on how this works, but those are the basic elements of the protocol. One person, the outbounder, goes to a target that the viewer is blind to, and then the viewer tries to learn about where the outbounder is. This is different than what most remote viewers do, at least most of the time. For example, in the Stargate program, they were trying to spy on things like what the Soviets had at a particular location inside Russia. Well, if you could get someone to that location, then that person could just see what was there and you wouldn't need the remote viewer. So in operational remote viewing, they don't really use the Outbounder protocol, but it can still be useful for some kinds of testing and experimentation. Well, a couple of folks I know are currently running an experiment using it, and they asked me to participate.
What did they ask you to do?
Basically, all I needed to do was pick a target without letting them know what it was, and then I needed to go to the target on a particular day at a particular time, stay there for 30 minutes, take some photos and videos to document where I'd been, write a description of the target and what happened while I was there, and then upload the information so they could analyze the sessions in accordance with the actual location details and provide feedback to the viewers.
So you didn't have to do anything psychic?
No, I'm not a remote viewer, so I didn't need to do anything psychic. I just needed to pick a spot, go there, and then document the experience. The psychic stuff was all done by other people. But it occurred to me that this could provide a practical test of remote viewing that I wanted to do for the audience of Mysterious World. So I asked my contacts if that would be okay, and they said yes. They also designated this target as one of the very few that they will release publicly prior to the completion of the project.
Before we go any further, let's ask a question that may be on the minds of some listeners. Even though you weren't doing anything psychic, were you concerned that something demonic might happen with this?
We've discussed this subject in previous episodes, like episode 79 on religion, magic, psychic phenomena, and science, and in episodes 105 and 106 on St. Thomas Aquinas and the occult. But the basic answer is not really. The Catholic Church does not regard anything psychic as demonic in origin. Doctors of the Church, like St. Augustine, Pope St. Gregory the Great, and St. Thomas Aquinas all believed that what we today would call psychic functioning is real and that it's a purely natural human ability. Recent popes like Pius XI and Pius XII also were both open to psychic phenomena. For example, Pope Pius XI was quite open to dowsing, which we discussed in episodes 246 and 247. And the most recent ruling from the Catholic Church permits even priests to serve as dowsers in scientific experiments. So as long as you're doing psychic stuff without trying to call up spirits, you're not in particular danger. And I wasn't doing anything psychic at all in this case. Furthermore, as someone who investigates the mysterious, including the genuinely demonic, I have a strong devotion to St. Michael the Archangel. I regularly say the St. Michael prayer for protection against the demonic, and I have confidence that God, St. Michael, and my guardian angel will protect me. So I don't need to be terrified that a demon is lurking under every rock. When there's actual evidence of the demonic, we need to take it seriously. But when there isn't actual evidence, we shouldn't be paranoid.
Okay, so how do you want to proceed with today's episode?
First, I'd like to talk about the experiment that I participated in. Then I'll discuss how I picked the target. I'll present you with a set of 4 targets, one of which is the real target and 3 of which are decoys. We'll show you what a remote viewer came up with. We'll look at how well that information matches up with the 4 proposed targets, if it matches up with any of them. Then I'll reveal what the actual target was, and we'll review the information in light of the target.
And let's get started. What do we know about the project?
The experiment is being done as part of a study series by MK Advisors. The principal investigator behind the experiment is Janas Results, a German remote viewer who I know and whom I've met in person, and who has a Mysterious World t-shirt. She did the experimental design for the project and is the project head. The project manager is Lily Fowler, who I also know, and who serves as an analyst on the project. There are also a couple of other analysts and some scientific advisors. The overall experiment is called the Timeline Project, and here's how Jana describes the project in a public announcement.
Some of you may already know that I've been entrusted with the task of leading a large-scale RV remote viewing research project. In preparation for this project, which is planned to span a total of 5 years, we seek to uncover some of the factors that influence the observation process in future-oriented remote viewing. These factors include investigating the impact of time-distance, the order and number of accesses, and the evaluation methods used. In order to isolate the investigation of individual factors, there will be several projects that are interconnected or coordinated with each other. This long-term project will require a fair number of experienced viewers that are trained at the intermediate level or above. As the leading project manager, Lily Fowler will coordinate the sessions and viewers, as well as participate in the analysis. In the preparation phase, which is planned to last for 1 year, we will need viewers to complete simple Outbounder sessions on a weekly basis to help us develop the optimal protocol and experimental design. This phase is crucial in setting up the experiment to give us the answers we seek for remote viewing advancement. Full feedback with pictures and potentially video recordings will be supplied before the next target is given. This will be an excellent opportunity for target practice with comprehensive feedback.
So that's the basic nature of the project. It's oriented towards figuring out what factors influence the observation process in future-oriented remote viewing. That's not part of the Outbounder Protocol itself, which just involves sending someone to a target. But Jana tells me that they're using the Outbounder Protocol so that they can get full feedback on the target as opposed to just picking a target off of Google Maps, and because it allows them to control various time factors that are involved. For example, trying to remote view precognitively, looking at what's going to happen at a site in the future. Because the experiment is said to involve future-oriented remote viewing, I assumed that they may have had viewers looking at where I would be before I actually went there. Though I wasn't sure about that because I'm largely blind to the structure of the experiment, which is in keeping with a lot of parapsychological research design, which is very big on keeping people blind to things they don't have a real need to know. In other areas of science, having double-blind experiments is considered the gold standard, but parapsychologists go way beyond that, with some experiments being quintuple blinded or having 5 levels of blindness, so nobody in the project has a complete picture until after the data collection phase is over. In the case of this experiment, I've been told that some of the viewers are doing their work precognitively, and some are doing it at the time of the Outbounder visit. In any event, being project manager, Lily Fowler reached out to me and asked if I could serve as an outbounder. She said that I get to pick the location, which would ideally be something interesting for the viewers to experience. It could be indoors or outdoors. It could involve an activity, like I could go horseback riding or something if I wanted. And that if I chose an open location, I would focus on one thing. Like if I was in a park, I might focus on a statue as the specific target. In any event, only I would know what the target was prior to data collection. Everyone else in the experiment would be blind to it. So I'm the only person in the world who knows where this is going to be. Lily also asked if I could send a picture of myself for the viewers to use, in part because the original viewers working with Outbounders knew the Outbounder. They'd met them before they worked their sessions. I thus sent Lily a photograph of me to help the viewers have a kind of flag to connect to the location where I was at, rather than just telling them, go to where the anonymous Outbounder is that you don't really know anything about. Though, of course, I was blind to who all the remote viewers were. Lily let me know that when the window was for me to visit the target, and I started thinking about local targets here in Northwest Arkansas that I might go to. So what I'm going to do now is show you 4 possible targets that I might have gone to. One of them is the actual target that I did visit, and 3 of them are decoy targets that I did not visit.
Why are you doing it this way? Why aren't you just going to show us the real target to begin with?
I'm borrowing a technique that is sometimes used in parapsychological experiments. For example, it's commonly used in a kind of telepathy test known as the Ganzfeld, which is German. It's a German term that means whole field. We can talk about the Ganzfeld more in a future episode, but what happens is that you have one person, the sender, who's trying to send mental images to another person who is the receiver. The receiver relaxes and blocks out sensory stimuli and then just narrates what comes into his head. Afterwards, he's presented with 4 proposed targets, one of which is real, and he's asked to pick which of the 4 targets most closely resembles what he saw in his head during the test session. The same 4 targets are shown to blind independent judges, and they're asked to compare the images to a transcript of what the receiver said during the session. Now, with 4 possible targets, the odds of guessing right by random chance would be 25% or 1 in 4. So if the receiver and the judges consistently guess more than 25% of the time, that's evidence for psychic functioning. And that is what happens in Ganzfeld experiments. Instead of guessing right 1 in 4 times, people tend to consistently guess right 1 in 3 times. It's not a huge effect, but it is there, and Ganzfeld participants are not trained psychics. They're just ordinary people. A trained psychic presumably could do even better. So to help the listeners evaluate how well the remote viewers' results match with where I actually was, I decided to show the listeners 4 images. I'm afraid that viewers of the video version of the podcast will have an advantage here, so you can go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy Akin, to watch the video and actually see the pictures, but I will at least be describing them for our audio listeners. This way, you you'll get to see the 4 possible locations I may have gone to. Then we'll hear what the viewer came up with. We'll see how closely it matches or doesn't match the images of where I might have gone, and then I'll reveal the actual location. I picked each of these possible targets because I thought that they were visually interesting and they were each quite different from the others, so that they'd be clearly distinct from each other, making it easier to decide which, if any, the viewer's information matches. I used a true random number generator, the one at random.org, to put these targets in random order. Randomizing targets is also standard procedure in parapsychology, so that you can't tell anything about which target is the true one based on the order in which they appear. Humans might have a tendency to put the true one at a certain position in the order. And so parapsychologists randomize the targets using true randomization, which is a concept we can talk about in the future, so that it's not predictable. The true target is not predictable based on the sequence or where it appears in sequence. Also, since I'm now publicly revealing these 4 possible targets or burning them, I will not be using any of these 4 targets in any future Outbounder sessions I do.
Okay, then what's the first possible target you may have gone to?
It's the Baldwin substation that belongs to Ozarks Electric Cooperative. It's an outdoor area that is fenced off with a padlocked chain link fence. There are prominent warning signs on the fence to keep people away, for example, warning them of the danger of electrocution. The ground is covered with gravel, and there are a bunch of large metal towers with transformers and all kinds of electrical equipment that I don't know the names of, and power lines snaking overhead.
Okay, if that's possible target number 1, what's possible target number 2?
It's a gazebo located on the grounds of Terra Art Studios outside of Fayetteville. The gazebo is about 10 feet tall and has 8 sides, one of which is a doorway. The gazebo walls are constructed of silvery metal rods, and they have little blue glass statues on them. There's also a blue walkway leading up to the gazebo.
All right, what's possible target number 3?
It's a large statue that's outside a local tattoo parlor called Beeline Tattoo. Here in Northwest Arkansas, the local team is the Arkansas Razorbacks, so Razorback imagery is very common. This statue is of a large Razorback that has been painted yellow and black to look like a bee with green ears and wings. It thus ties into the branding of Beeline Tattoo, and it sits by itself in front of the building on College Avenue, which is the main business street through town.
And what's possible target number 4?
It's a fallen tree that's in a patch of woods. The tree is leaning over at an extreme angle. It's got some moss on it. Some of its bark has come off, and it's surrounded by other trees that are bolt upright. And on the ground, the ground is covered by a lot of dry leaves that fell off last winter, as well as a few plants.
Now, let's take a look at what the remote viewer came up with. Do you know who it was?
I'm sure that there were multiple remote viewers looking at the site as part of the experiment. And in fact, I'm told there are actually around 40 viewers doing so. And they don't normally share the viewers' written sessions with the Outbounders. But in this case, after I asked about using this on Mysterious World, they made an exception. They sent me the transcript of Janas Results' session. She's the lead investigator behind the experiment, you'll recall. She did an 11-page session on where I was functioning as Outbounder, and I thought her session was actually very good. Jana tells me that this is not her best session and that she can do better, but it can be helpful to show that remote viewing isn't 100% correct, so she didn't mind showing the session as long as it was put in context. Now, there are multiple different ways of doing remote viewing. Some of them are very informal, and some of them are highly formal and detailed. Jana was using one of the more formal detailed protocols, which is called CRV, or Controlled Remote Viewing. It was developed by Ingo Swann for the Stargate program, and Paul Smith described it for us back in episodes 156 and 157, and it basically divides up the remote viewing process into a series of numbered stages with different kinds of information about the target being sought at each level. Based on her transcript, Jana went up to stage 4, and for people who may not be familiar with remote viewing, the viewer is not initially trying to get the full picture of what is at the target. They're trying to pull specific details about it that will let them build up an overall picture, like putting together the pieces of a puzzle. They do this through a combination of writing down words to describe impressions they're getting, sketching aspects of the target, and then they offer an overall summary of what they perceived, which by its nature can only include some of the impressions they get, but they still put everything down on paper in case they perceived something important that didn't make it into the summary.
Then let's go through Jana's summary in order. What did she see in stage 1?
Stage 1 is where the viewer makes contact with the target, and Ingo Swann noted that when people do this, they often make a kind of initial squiggle on the paper in front of them. So he decided to make this a formal part of the process. The contact squiggle is known as an ideogram or idiogram, and the idiogram is not supposed to be a visual representation of the site. Instead, it's more about the feeling or motion that one would experience at the site, and then based on the ideogram, the viewer using CRV writes down certain impressions they received. In this case, Jana started stage 1 and made an ideogram, and she wrote down the impressions curving down, circling round, curving down, pointing steep down, and vibrating. She then experienced some confusion, so she declared a confusion break. She then reacquired the target, making a new ideogram, and here she wrote sloping down, curving, hard, land, stepping down, angle, curving across, hard, and structure. She also wrote sloping up, pointing, sloping down, dense, structure, curving, along, hard, and land. And when you put all that together, her first impression was that the target was some kind of structure on land. So that was stage 1.
What is stage 2 supposed to allow the viewer to pick up?
In stage 2, remote viewers who are using CRV are attempting to get sensory impressions of the target. These are like adjectives that could describe what one would see, hear, smell, taste, or touch at the target. One of the things you're not supposed to do is use a bunch of nouns at this stage, because in order to name a noun, you have to let your analytic reasoning skills find an appropriate noun. And experimentation suggests that this leads to bad results. For example, if you were correctly picking up the sensory adjectives red and round, your analytic reasoning might say, oh, the target is a red round ball, when in reality, the target was a red round apple.
What do you do if you have a thought like ball pop into your head, even though you're going for adjectives?
You're supposed to write it down anyway, because it might be accurate, and because writing it down will also allow you to let go of the impression and move on. But you're supposed to flag it as an analytical overlay, or AOL, since it was the product of your analytical mind. And so you declare an AOL break and write it down and then move on. You may also start doing some basic sketching of what you're perceiving at this stage.
What did Jana perceive in stage 2?
She wrote down the following descriptors: earthy smell, dark brown, green, humming, dripping, moist, flat, hard, concrete-y, round, multiple, curved, overhanging, black, metallic, cool, slippery, sloping, smooth, stony, and concrete-y again. She then declared an AOL break and wrote winding down, changing direction, and serpentine. She then added the descriptors parallel, vertical, and narrow, then another AOL break for indoors, then the descriptors gray, concrete-y, stepped, curved, arching, tall, and hollow, then a couple of AOL breaks for animals and zoo, then the descriptors narrowing, perpendicular, flat, and smooth, and what's known as an aesthetic impact break, which gives the overall aesthetic impression she had of the site, which was calm. She also started doing some very basic sketch impressions, one of which looks like a straight line with some circles or cylinder tops on under it, one of which looks like a wave with a valley between two peaks, and one of which looks like the letter S.
Okay, what happens in stage 3 of the CRV process?
one typically starts to get more of an integrated impression of what the target is like as a whole, and one is likely to have a stronger urge to start sketching the target as a whole. So the sketching becomes more intense.
And what did Jana perceive at this stage?
She didn't actually label stage 3 as stage 3 in her results, but it's obvious from the fact that she's doing a bunch of sketching between stage 2 and stage 4 that that's where she's at in the process. One of her sketches has a kind of overall curve at the top of the drawing. Under that are a series of a set of vertical rectangles standing next to each other. And below that is what looks like a set of round circular steps. Written next to this, she has the descriptors glassy, metallic, dark, and light gray. She then has a couple of AOL breaks, one of which says RMO, or reminds me of curved steps, and another that says rainy raindrops. Her next pair of sketches are labeled from top view, which I assume would mean looking down on the target from above. Both of these sketches have a diagonal element with lines coming off of both sides of it. In the first one, the lines look very straight, and she's labeled this one with the descriptors woody and hollow. In the second one, the diagonal element looks to me like a road in the middle of a valley, and she's labeled the diagonal element with the descriptors hard, gray, smooth, and wet. Her next sketch looks like a series of steps going up a curved surface, and she's labeled it ascending. Then there's what looks like a vertical element with multiple side elements coming off of it at an angle with a pair of brackets around this. Jana has labeled this curved and enclosed, and there's an AOL break that says, like enclosed by big, curved, thin structures. Under that is an illustration of multiple diagonal elements stacked vertically in a mirror image of each other, and she's labeled these as movable and draws arrows to indicate how they could move. Finally, below that, she's drawn 6 vertical rectangles standing next to each other at angles on both sides of a flat horizontal path that goes between them.
That brings us to stage 4. What's supposed to happen at this stage?
At this stage, the viewer is supposed to pick up general qualitative and analytical aspects of the target and classify this material. CRV viewers write abbreviations for 8 categories at the top of their stage 4 pages. The first category, labeled S2, represents sensory impressions like those picked up in stage 2. The second category, labeled D, represents dimensionals, or things that pertain to the size of the target. The third category, labeled AI, represents the aesthetic impact of the target, or how the target makes the viewer feel. The fourth category, labeled EI, represents the emotional impact of the target, or how the emotions of people at the site feel. The fifth category, labeled T, represents tangibles, or things you could touch at the target, and here it is okay to use nouns. The sixth category, labeled I, represents intangibles, or things about the target that cannot be touched. The seventh category, labeled AOL, represents analytical overlay elements of the target, or things that our analytical reasoning would suggest about it. And the eighth category, labeled AS, represents AOL from signal, or things that could be AOL but may not be. The viewer can also include sketches at any point in the stage 4 process.
So, with that as background, what did Jana perceive in her stage 4?
Jana made a point to me that even though the information is recorded in columns in stage 4 of CRV, you're supposed to read the descriptors as clusters describing the same thing. So, taking that approach, her first impression was of vertical, thin, similar structures in rows. She then had an impression of something that was movable, technical, and adjustable, and something that reminded her of flowing water. She then did a sketch, which was a flat circle with a sort of rectangular object sitting on top of it. She then wrote down curved flat base and ascending step-in. She also wrote hard stony structure, then smooth curved round sloping structure, and at this point, she drew another sketch of a conical mound. On the next page, she drew two sets of vertical parallel lines facing each other, and she wrote similar elements standing in parallel and in two opposing rows. She also drew something that looked like these same parallel lines but bending towards each other at the top. And she wrote curving metallic high overhanging geometrical. She then wrote artwork, public art, technical, and rusty, open at the top, impressed, happy, relaxed. On the next page, she had a more detailed illustration that's hard to describe without interpreting it, but it had a low, flat, possibly water-like area in front, a structure with horizontal and vertical elements in the center, and a distant, somewhat jumbled skyline in the background. She also declared an AOL break in which she said, city skyline in the background. Finally, on the last page of stage 4, she wrote nice, proud, object, representative, and industrial age. She also wrote high, curved, silvery, metallic. She wrote concretey rounded base and monument. Finally, she wrote leading through, temporarily visited, and that was it. Those were all the sensory impressions she recorded. She then wrote a summary of her perceptions and said,
Summary. Target is a complex structure located on land. Terrain is slightly sloping, with a rounded base of stony or concretey material. There is an aspect of flat steps and ascending elements, leading through something. A formation of similar high and thin metallic elements. The elements are curved or rounded and arranged in opposing rows. Impression as if something about these elements is movable or adjustable. Also an aspect of overhanging roofy elements. The target elements are arranged for a purpose, but also with a sense of aesthetic appearance. Could be industrial or monumental or a mixture of both. People at the site come here for shorter periods of time with feelings of happiness and pride. Several metallic elements arranged on a concretey base, but with a functional aspect or depicting and representing a function. Weather conditions are cool, possibly wet surfaces from rain.
So those are all of the things that Jana perceived about where I went as an outbounder. And now we're ready to compare what she saw to the 4 possible targets, reveal where I really was, and how closely Jana's perceptions matched it.
And before we do that, we want to take a moment now to thank our patrons who make this show possible, including Ronald P., Abe, Roman V., Luke P., and Father Eric T. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is also brought to you by DeliverContacts.com, offering top brand contact lenses at always low prices with free delivery. Visit DeliverContacts.com. And by Exodus 90 and the Exodus 90 app, a daily companion to help you grow closer to God and to become the man you want to be. This summer, join the Enthronement to the Sacred Heart, the Exodus 90 Summer Book Club, and St. Michael's Lent, beginning August 15th and leading up to the Feast of St. Michael the Archangel on September 29th. Go to exodus90.com/SQPN for a 14-day free trial to the Exodus 90 app and to learn more about St. Michael's Lent. That's exodus90.com/SQPN to join us for St. Michael's Lent starting August 15th. So, Jimmy, how do you want to proceed from here?
First, we're going to compare Jana's findings to each of the proposed targets and see which one, if any, they seem to favor. And we'll be focusing on targets which we can eliminate. Now, bear in mind, Jana was not aware of these targets. In fact, I didn't even pick the decoys until after she had done her viewing, which helps avoid something in parapsychology known as the displacement effect, which is whereas if there's more than one possible target, you will unintentionally view the incorrect target. I didn't pick the decoys until after Jana had done her viewing, so that should help avoid displacement. And what we're doing is an after-the-fact exercise to see if Jana's results match one of the possible targets, with the others being places I might have gone. because I thought they were visually interesting and I had access to them. Then I'll reveal what the actual target was, and we'll look over Janas results and see how they did or didn't fit once you know the answer.
Okay, so where do you want to start?
Well, Jana perceived a lot of descriptors, and you could find individual descriptors that could fit any of the 4 proposed targets, at least if you press the descriptors hard enough, and that's normal. So what you want to do is look not at individual descriptors here and there, but at the major themes that came through in the results. One of those is that the target is a structure, meaning a man-made structure that is on land. It's right there twice in her stage 1 results, and it's in her overall summary where she says target is a complex structure located on land. It's also in a lot of her results describing this structure. For example, in the summary, she says that it has
a rounded base of stony or concretey material. There is an aspect of flat steps and ascending elements leading through something. A formation of similar high and thin metallic elements. Several metallic elements arranged on a concretey base.
What all this would rule out is the 4th target. This is clearly not describing a fallen tree in the woods. That is not a man-made structure. This would have gone in a different category altogether, that of a natural target. And there's certainly nothing metallic or concrete at this site. So based on what Jana perceived, we could eliminate target 4.
Could we eliminate any of the other targets fairly easily based on what she perceived?
I think the next most promising one to eliminate based on what she saw would be the beeline tattoo statue. In her initial results, she had a couple of AOL breaks where she wrote animals and zoo, but this would only be one single animal, and these were descriptors in AOL breaks where Jana thought her analytic reasoning was intruding. Also, this was a minor element that didn't make it into the overall summary, which says,
a formation of similar high and thin metallic elements. The elements are curved or rounded and arranged in opposing rows. Impression as if something about these elements is movable or adjustable. Also an aspect of overhanging roofy elements. Several metallic elements arranged on a concretey base.
None of that fits the beeline tattoo statue. It's on a wooden base, and it's not made of metal elements in parallel rows. The statue is a single big piece of concrete. Jana also says,
people at the site come here for shorter periods of time, with feelings of happiness and pride.
And that really doesn't happen at the statue. People don't come to visit it for short periods of time with feelings of happiness and pride. It just sits out on the highway to let you know the tattoo parlor is there, and people go into the tattoo parlor. They don't normally pay visits to the statue. So I'm seeing a lot of elements here that would point away from the beeline statue based on what Jana saw, and we would eliminate this one as well.
That leaves us with the Baldwin substation of the Ozarks Electric Cooperative and the gazebo at Terra Studios. Can we decide between these?
This is a little more challenging because both of these are complex structures on land, and they do both involve metal elements in parallel rows. In her summary, Jana said that the target has a rounded base of stony or concretey material. But the substation has a foundation of gravel, so that's stony, but it isn't rounded. It's just a flat plane of gravel. Also, the electrical equipment is set on small concrete pads, but it's a bunch of different pads, not a single rounded base. On the other hand, the gazebo is octagonal, which is, basically circular or rounded, and its foundation is made of blue tiles that have been cemented together. The summary says that the terrain is slightly sloping and that there's an aspect of flat steps and ascending elements leading through something. The substation doesn't have any steps, but the gazebo has a path of blue tiles leading up to it on slightly sloping terrain, and inside the gazebo there is an octagonal step-like structure. The summary says that there is a formation of similar high and thin metallic elements. That fits both the substation and the gazebo, but then it says the elements are curved or rounded and arranged in opposing rows, and that fits the gazebo better since it's octagonal and thus looks curved or rounded in a way the substation does not. And Jana says that people come to the target for shorter periods of time with feelings of happiness and pride. But that doesn't describe the substation, where very few people come. There are even warning electrocution signs around it. And they only come to fix things when they're broken. So based on Jana's perceptions about the target, I'd say we'd probably want to eliminate the substation as well.
Then the time has come to reveal the actual target. So where were you?
Howdy, folks. It may not look like it, but at the moment, I'm participating in a scientific experiment. Recently, I was contacted by someone I know in the remote viewing community who is doing an experiment that involves a series of what are known as Outbounder tests or Outbounder experiments. This is a protocol that was developed very early in the history of research into remote viewing back in the 1970s. And basically what happens is a person is assigned to go to a target, and then one or more remote viewers tries to view where that person is and what's going on at the target. So that person is known as the outbounder. They go out and they then arrive at the target, and the viewers try to see what they're doing and where they're at. So I was contacted and asked to pick a target. Nobody but me knows what the target is, and so the viewers are all blind to the target. Also, interestingly, I am blind to the purpose of the experiment. I don't know what they're testing. So that's one illustration of how people in parapsychology tend to be very good methodologically. They really take pains to try to ensure multiple layers of blindness so that nobody has any information about the full picture of what's going on. So where am I? Well, I'm at a location called Terra Studios. Terra Studios is an art park. They both make art here, and they have a multi-acre park in the woods outside of Fayetteville, Arkansas, my hometown. And I've known about Terra Studios for a long time. They're famous for these little statuettes that you can see behind me that are known as the Bluebirds of Happiness. They're little glass sculptures, and they are very popular. They used to have a deal with Hallmark to make, manufacture, and distribute them, but they were famous for them even before then. After my wife died, I got a couple of Bluebirds of Happiness. I forget exactly how I got them. I think my mom got them for me, or in any event, I have these two Bluebirds of Happiness, and one of them slightly larger than the other, and I've always interpreted them as representing me and Renee. The slightly larger one is me, and the slightly smaller one is Renee. And they've meant a lot to me, and I keep them on my bookshelves at home. So when I was asked to pick a target, I thought, Terra Studios, I haven't been there in decades. I've driven past it recently, but I hadn't been here in decades. And so I thought, I bet it's visually interesting there. And so I came out here on Sunday and walked around and looked all over the place. And yeah, there's a lot of really visually interesting stuff here. But I decided, because it's such a complex environment, that it could be hard for viewers to, describe the whole thing. And I was asked as part of the experiment, if the target is outdoors, to pick one thing. Like if it was in a park, I might pick a bench or a gazebo or something like that. And so I thought that I would pick the Bluebirds of Happiness Memorial or Museum or whatever they call it, because it's representative of the place, and it's much more visually interesting. You've got these horizontal lines with all these bluebirds on it, and I'll show you some more pictures from other angles. But basically, I was asked to come out here and sit for 30 minutes, or be at the target for 30 minutes, and then take pictures of it, take notations about what the weather is like, what sounds I'm hearing in the background, things like that, and take a few videos. So I thought this could be interesting for you. And so that's what I'm doing. When I got here, I was a little surprised because I didn't know. I came out on a Sunday, and I didn't know that they were closed today. And so when I got here, their gate was closed, And I decided to walk down. I almost picked a different target outside of their gate. But I decided to walk down and see if I could find someone who could give me permission to be here. I also tried calling their phone number. I only got an answering machine, unfortunately. So I sat down here, a number of minutes before the test period began. And a gentleman came by and asked if I was meeting someone here. And I was, very polite. And I said, hey, I'm participating in a scientific experiment. All I need to do is sit here for 30 minutes and take a few pictures. Is that okay? Can I have permission for that? And he very kindly said yes. So I have official permission, although I'm a little nervous that someone else might come by and who's different from him and, object to me being here. But if that happens, I'll explain the same thing and that I did ask for permission and this gentleman gave it to me. So everything should be okay. And it's very pleasant here. It's a very nice day. It is not hot. There's a pond nearby, which it says on my phone that the temperature here is 75 degrees Fahrenheit, but there's a pond nearby that may be bringing it down a little bit from whatever weather station that's drawn on. And there's also a nice breeze. And so it's really pleasant here. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the remote viewers come up with and how much of this structure they're able to pick up on. So I'll talk to you a little bit more in a few minutes.
So yeah, I was at the Bluebirds of Happiness gazebo at Terra Studios, and I do indeed have a couple of the famous Bluebirds of Happiness that I keep on my bookshelf. You may even be able to catch glimpses of them in the background over my shoulder on Mysterious World.
So now that we know what the actual target is, let's go back over Janas' results and see how they match the actual site. Her stage 1 results said that it was a structure on land, and that was obviously correct. Anything else we should say about stage 1?
She also got adjectives like curving down, circling around, pointing, steep, hard, and angle, and those all fit the gazebo with its the octagonal gazebo. It curves around with its pointed top. In stage 2, she got the sensory impression of an earthy smell, which could be from the rural environment I was in, because this is out in the country. But it also could be from something else. In the feedback report I submitted, I noted under smells/tastes that there was, quote, the smell and taste of my pipe tobacco, sweet with notes of blackberry, apple, dark cherry, apricot, and peach. Jana picked up on dark brown and green, which could be because the art park is located smack in the middle of the woods. She also got flat, hard, smooth, stony, and concretey, which corresponds to the gazebo and what it's made of. There were a couple of AOL breaks where Jana said winding down, change in direction, and serpentine. And I think that corresponds to the way the Bluebirds of Happiness change direction on the different rows of the gazebo in a serpentine manner from top to bottom. Jana also got parallel, vertical, and narrow, which describes the way the rows of the gazebo are arranged. They are parallel, vertical, and narrow. She had an AOL break of indoors, and I was sitting inside the gazebo on a camping chair for almost the whole time. The gazebo was also tall and hollow, like she said. We already mentioned her AOL breaks of animals and zoo, and I think she was picking up on the Bluebirds of Happiness themselves. They are representations of animals, and you've got all these animals in conjunction with bars, and that suggests a zoo. She also had an aesthetic impacts of calm, happy, and relaxed. And as I noted in my feedback report, quote, adjectives that occurred to me describing the experience of sitting there include cool, breezy, relaxing, pleasant, natural, and artistic.
How about her stage 3 results? How did they fare?
This is where Jana did most of her sketching. She had an overall sketch of the structure with a curved top, a series of vertical rectangular panes in the middle, and a set of rounded steps at the bottom, which she AOL'd as reminding her of curved steps. She also attached the descriptors glassy, metallic, dark, and light gray to this sketch, as well as rainy and raindrops. And that seems to correspond well to the gazebo, which has a peaked roof with vertical rectangular panels under that, and a rounded octagonal step-like structure in the middle. It also has glassy statues on metal rods that are light gray, And the descriptor dark and the AOLs of rainy and raindrops could be her attempt to make sense of the shiny dark blue tiles on the floor. From the top view, Jana had diagonal elements with lines coming off of them. These also had the descriptors woody, hollow, hard, gray, smooth, and wet. While I don't have pictures from above the gazebo, I can tell you what its roof looks like from the underneath. And it does have diagonal elements that are hard, gray, and smooth. They are set in a structure that is hollow. Wet may be an attempt to make sense of the dark blue, though woody really doesn't fit. Jana also had a sketch which she labeled Ascendant, which had a series of step-like structures going up at a slight incline, and that could be the path of dark blue tiles ascending the slight incline, which she mentioned, up to the octagonal pedestal inside the gazebo. She also had a couple of sketches that focused on a central vertical element with horizontal elements coming out from it at angles, which she labeled as curved enclosed. She also had the AOL break like enclosed by curved thin structures, which is exactly what it was like in the gazebo, as I was sitting inside a structure made of vertical elements with horizontal elements coming off at angles, and I was indeed enclosed by thin structures that were curving around me. Jana also said that these seemed movable, and while they had been fixed in place by this point, they would have been movable at some point. In stage 3, Jana also had another overall picture of the target where she has multiple vertical rectangles on both sides of a path leading between them. And that is very much like the gazebo, except she doesn't have the vertical rectangles arranged in a circle like the curving circling element she mentioned earlier.
Then let's turn to stage 4 and see how Jana did. What can we say here?
Her descriptors were really good. She got things like vertical, thin, similar, structures, row, movable, technical, adjustable, all of which described the structure I was sitting in, with the more movable, adjustable elements applying to when it was first put together. She had an AOL of reminds me of flowing water, which I suspect was the shiny dark blue tiles on the floor, because it was just before she started describing the center pedestal in the gazebo. She had a couple of drawings of that, and she applied the descriptors curved, flat, ascending, step-in, base, hard, stony structure, and smooth, curved, rounded, sloping ground. On the next page, she had some sketching about the construction of the target, which she described as similar elements stand in parallel in two opposing rows, which she showed meeting above, along with the descriptors carving, metallic, high, overhanging, geometrical, artwork, public art, and technical, which describes exactly what the gazebo is, a technical public work of art. She also had the descriptor rusty, which applies to the roof. The gazebo is old enough that there is some rust damage on the roof, which you can see if you look carefully at some of the video I took. On the other hand, she also had the descriptor open at the top, which the gazebo is not, so that one doesn't fit. On the next page, she has another overall sketch with the AOL break city skyline in the background. While it's possible to see elements of the gazebo itself in this, what this really looks like to me is a sketch of the overall art park. There is a set of buildings right next to the gazebo that look more like what she sketched, with a pond or lake to one side of them. And we were outside the city of Fayetteville, though I don't know that you can really see it in the distance because of the trees. Unfortunately, I don't have a good photo to show you. In terms of her own aesthetic impact from the site, she got impressed and nice. And she thought that the emotional impact on the visitors would make them happy, relaxed, and proud. She thought that the target was an object that had a base that was representative and connected to the industrial age and may have been a monument. She described it as high, curved, silvery, metallic, concrete-y, and rounded, and she thought something was leading through it and that it was temporarily visited. All of that fits with the gazebo, and there's a particular aspect of it that people who aren't locals may not appreciate. As I mentioned, the Bluebirds of Happiness are what made Terra Studios famous. In fact, the door of the gazebo, at the top, there is a sign that says, "In honor of the Bluebirds of Happiness, they made everything possible." So the gazebo is a monument to the Bluebirds, which are what made Terrace Studios and the art park possible. And they are extremely popular locally. So visitors to the gazebo would feel happy, relaxed, and proud, but they'd only visit it temporarily because there's a lot more to see in the art park, and the gazebo is only a single small part of the overall park. But the Bluebirds of Happiness are what made it all possible.
We've now gone through Jana's initial impression of the target, but let's finish up by looking at her summary and see how she did.
Okay, here's the summary with commentary from me on accuracy.
Summary. Target is a complex structure located on land.
True, it is a complex structure on land.
Terrain is slightly sloping, with a rounded base of stony or concretey material. There is an aspect of flat steps and ascending elements, leading through something.
The ground does slightly slope up to the gazebo. It does have a rounded pedestal made of concrete and covered with dark blue tiles. This does look like a step. And the path up through the gazebo is made of the same blue tiles as the ones covering the pedestal. So the blue tile path leads through the target.
A formation of similar high and thin metallic elements. The elements are curved or rounded and arranged in opposing rows.
There is a formation of similar high, thin metallic elements, the bars to which the Bluebirds are attached. And because of the octagonal structure, they are curved or rounded and arranged in opposing rows, with each of the vertical panels having one directly opposite to it, except for the door.
Impression as if something about these elements is movable or adjustable.
This impression strikes me as partly accurate. The Bluebirds themselves were movable before they were made part of the structure, and the bars on which they sit look like they were originally adjustable, but the structure is now fixed in place.
Also an aspect of overhanging roofy elements.
Yes, the gazebo has a peaked roof overhead.
The target elements are arranged for a purpose, but also with a sense of aesthetic appearance. Could be industrial or monumental, or a mixture of both.
The target elements are arranged for a purpose. That purpose does include their aesthetic appearance. The birds are produced on an industrial scale, like with the Hallmark contract. They told me that at one point they were running shifts to produce the Bluebirds 24 hours a day. And the gazebo is a monument to them because of how they allowed Terrace Studios to succeed.
People at the site come here for shorter periods of time, with feelings of happiness and pride.
People do come here for shorter periods of time. They don't typically stay long inside the gazebo because of how small it is, but they do feel happy and take pride in the Bluebirds of Happiness.
Several metallic elements arranged on a concretey base, but with a functional aspect, or depicting and representing a function.
There are several metallic elements arranged on a concrete tiled base, but I'm not sure about them having a functional aspect or depicting or representing a function. Their function is to be artistic and commemorate the Bluebirds and the success that they brought.
Weather conditions are cool, possibly wet surfaces from rain.
Weather conditions were cool. In fact, in the video, I commented on how cool it was and how it felt cooler than the 75 degrees my phone said it was. But the surfaces were not wet due to rain. I think this was Jana's attempt to make sense of the shiny dark blue tiles that covered the floor. And Jana tells me that she agrees with that it was the impressions of cool, smooth, and blue that led to this impression, and that it was technically what would be referred to as an undeclared analytical overlay, where her rational thought was trying to make sense out of these impressions.
So, Jimmy, how would you rank Jana's perceptions of the target that you chose?
Judging experiments like this is a somewhat subjective matter, and there are different ways of doing it, but one way that it's done is using what's known as the Targ scale, which was popularized by researcher Russell Targ. The Targ scale ranks remote viewing results on a scale from 0 to 7. At the bottom is 0, which represents no correspondence between the results and the target. At the top is 7, which is described as excellent correspondence, including good analytical detail, for example, naming the target, and with essentially no incorrect information. Just below that is 6, which represents good correspondence with good analytical information. For example, naming the function of the target and relatively little incorrect information. Jana didn't name the target. She didn't say, it's the Bluebirds of Happiness gazebo, but she did name its function, saying it was a monument and public artwork. There was lots of good correspondence with the target, and there was relatively little incorrect information. So I'd say, to me, this looks like you could consider it a 6, although Jana told me that she'd rank it as a 5. But either way, a 5 or a 6, this is really good, considering that Jana was blind to the target, and it could have been anything in the world, or at least anything you can find in Arkansas, and I made sure that it was something quite unusual that you would find in Arkansas.
So, Jimmy, what's your bottom line here?
Remote viewing is a very interesting topic. The research findings on it are good enough that it has been used by government agencies, and I think that this particular demonstration was quite impressive. However, everybody has to make up their own mind about it, and so I leave it to the listener to make their own determination.
And so, Jimmy, what further resources on the topic would you offer the viewers and listeners?
We'll have a link to a book by Paul Smith, Tom McNear, and Jana Roga titled The Foundations of Controlled Remote Viewing. We'll also have a link to Paul Smith's book, The Essentials of Remote Viewing, and his book, Reading the Enemy's Mind, which is a history of remote viewing research and the Stargate program. We'll also have a link to Terra Studios, to the Targ Scale, and to an interview with Jana Roga.
Excellent. And now it's time to hear from you. What are your theories about the Outbound experiment that Jimmy took part in? Let us know by visiting sqpn.com or the Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World Facebook page, sending us an email to feedback@mysterious.fm, sending a tweet to @mys_world, visiting the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord, or calling our mysterious feedback line at 619-738-4515. That's 619-738-4515.
And I want to say a special word of thanks to Oasis Studio 7 for the video and animation work on this episode. You can check out their work by going to my YouTube channel, which, if you're one of our audio listeners, you really should watch the video for this episode because it's so visually dependent. My YouTube channel is youtube.com/Jimmy Akin. And while you're there, be sure to do all the YouTube things, like, comment, and share the video, and also be sure and subscribe and hit the bell notification so you get notified whenever I have a new video. And I am trying to grow my channel, so thank you very much.
I also want to thank Anna Fontaine for her voiceover work on this episode.
Next week is a 5th Friday, so we'll be answering weird questions on subjects like mechanical telepathy, competition in heaven, aliens in heaven, convert popes, alien demons, levels in heaven and hell, Neanderthals in Genesis, what happens to your soul if you get assimilated by the Borg, and more.
Excellent. Folks, be sure to check out the Mysterious World bookstore at mysteriousworldstore.com for links to all the books and videos that Jimmy mentions in the show. Get your very own Mysterious World t-shirt, mug, or more in our merchandise shop at sqpn.com/merch. You'll find links to Jimmy's resources from our discussion on our show notes at mysterious.fm/326. And remember, to help us continue to produce the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is also brought to you by Great Lakes Customs Law, helping importers and individuals with seizures, penalties, and compliance with U.S. customs matters throughout the United States. Visit GreatLakesCustomsLaw.com. And by Rosary Army, featuring award-winning Catholic podcasts, rosary resources, videos, and the School of Mary online community, prayer, and learning platform. Learn how to make them, pray them, and give them away while growing in your faith at rosaryarmy.com and schoolofmary.com. And by The Grady Group, a Catholic company bringing financial clarity to their clients across the United States, using safe money options to produce reasonable rates of return for their clients. Learn more at GradyGroupInc.com. Until next time, Jimmy Akin, thank you for exploring with us our mysterious world.
Thanks, Tom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World on StarQuest.